I flew on Air Canada's inaugural A321XLR flight. Back in 2022, Air Canada ordered 30 of Airbus's longest-range variant of the A321neo for use on their shorter transatlantic flights and some transcontinental ones too. A321neos in general have proven to be exceptionally popular around the world, and for Air Canada, the XLR version opens up quite a few new city pairs from Toronto and Montreal that might not justify a widebody. With that, the XLRs also have the first lie-flat seats on any single-aisle plane in Canada, as well as a new long-haul cabin design that AC calls their glowing-hearted cabin. After a couple delays and the inaugural flight, originally scheduled for early May, the first A321XLR was finally delivered to Canada at the end of April. It was shown off at a couple employee events in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, before the actual inaugural flight on June 9th, flying between Montreal and Toronto. After that, it'll also be flying between Montreal and Calgary, before starting its first transatlantic flights on June 15th from Montreal to Toulouse. Now, I will admit, as someone who loves classic aviation, the A321neo is not the most exciting airplane out there, especially since it seems like every airline under the sun has one at this point. However, it's not every day a Canadian airline introduces a new type to their fleet, even if it is a variant of one they already fly. Seeing as AC also tends to keep their planes around for 20 to 30 years, it was definitely worth getting on this as the very first revenue flight. So I found my way to Montreal's YUL airport, which feels more like a perpetual construction site than an actual airport these days. As a pretty run-of-the-mill domestic flight, the check-in process here wasn't any different than usual, but I still made sure to print off a boarding pass. Although the business class seats are arguably the most interesting part of these new planes, I'm sticking to economy today. The distance and the price tag did not really make it worth it. Just after check-in, they had a little setup for some media stuff, but most of that would be happening at the gate. Interestingly, the flight status in the Air Canada app had a little note saying exactly that. After security and past some more construction was the star of the show for today, Air Canada's first A321XLR, very fittingly registered as Charlie Golf X-Ray Lima Romeo. This plane is pretty much as brand new as you can get. It was assembled at Airbus's facility in Hamburg, Germany, and made its first flight at the end of February. It then flew straight from Hamburg to Windsor, Ontario for some extra cabin modifications before making its way to Montreal. Airbus's A320neo family comes with two different engine options, the CFM LEAP or the Pratt & Whitney GTF. Air Canada picked the latter for their XLRs, which is interesting given the engine issues they had on the A220s, which use a smaller version of the same engine. I have heard the GTFs are slightly more fuel efficient over longer distances, but it's also entirely possible that Pratt & Whitney gave them a good deal. Either way, my understanding is that those well-documented engine issues have been resolved on most new GTFs built after a certain point. Meanwhile, at Gate 7, there was this nice event set up, with a bunch of photo backgrounds, as well as some snacks, drinks, and some branded cookies. This may not have been the best gate for this in terms of space, since it got pretty crowded, but we heard a few words from Air Canada's Executive Vice President, as well as from Airbus and ADM, en français, of course.
So today is extremely surreal. We started this project on the 321XLR literally 8 years ago. When we first met with Airbus, 8 or 9 years ago now, we heard of this aircraft called the A321, an aircraft we know really, really well. And they said to us, Mark, we're going to put an extra fuel tank, and we're going to be able to fly across the ocean with this thing. And my eyes lit up. And even though it's been 8 years, and we ordered the aircraft in 2022, it's amazing to be here today to witness our first ever commercial flight. This is not just the first flight of a new airplane, what's the big deal? It's the beginning of a new era for Air Canada. A new era where we're going to grow this airline substantially. By the end of the decade, this airline will be almost 30% bigger than it is today. We're going to be growing our network, and we're going to be making this country really, really proud. We good, guy? Yes, sir. Hey!
Now, YUL being YUL, boarding was chaotic to say the least, but eventually it was time to hop on board Air Canada's newest addition to the fleet.
We're especially excited to welcome you as some of the first guests flying on our new Airbus A321XLR. Thank you for being part of this inaugural flight. We're very glad to have you with us today.
Right when you walk in, the entryway is really nice, with this beautiful maple leaf design on the ceiling. At the front of the cabin, obviously, are the new business class pods, which Air Canada brands as Signature Class. There are 14 of these in a 1-1 layout, each seat having direct aisle access. The cabin also has the new extra-large overhead bins from Airbus, which are noticeably bigger. I did try out one of these seats after we landed, and we'll show that a little later in the video. Behind a bulkhead with some extra storage space is the start of economy class, with the first 4 rows being preferred seats. The 2 overwing exit rows are also considered preferred seats for a total of 6 rows of extra legroom. My seat for today's special flight was 13F. Settling in here, the legroom in the preferred seats is quite nice, and the seats themselves are surprisingly comfortable. Unlike some other XLR operators, AC chose not to add a premium economy class, so this is the best intermediate option between economy and business. Row 13 also has an okay view, although 12 would be slightly better, with the best engine views probably being from one of the last rows of Signature. First impressions here though, this is a really well thought out economy seat. I'll go through everything in more detail later, but the IFE is a 4K OLED screen, which makes things pop almost immediately. Ordinarily, I would have picked the bulkhead row right in front, which looks pretty good, but for today, I really wanted to see a regular economy seatback. One very pleasant surprise in this era of airlines cheaping out on ventilation is the fact that air vents actually still exist on this plane. As we boarded, passengers were each given one of these gift bags, which included a keychain, a little welcome note, an Air Canada and Airbus branded hat, and this water bottle. I do like that these were all co-branded with the A321XLR logo too. Airbus is really good at that. Like I said, I'll save swiping through the IFE for later, but the first thing I had to check out were the exterior cameras. There's one pointing forward and another one pointing straight down, both of which are surprisingly good quality. Air Canada's refreshed A321 CEOs also have a tail camera too, which I have yet to experience, but all of these are easily the coolest possible additions to their entertainment.
And welcome aboard the latest addition to the Air Canada fleet, the Airbus A321XLR, which marks a new era in comfort as we connect you to the world. We're so proud to have you with us today, and we wish you a pleasant flight to Toronto. My name is Adrian, I'm your service director, and on behalf of the entire crew, we're happy to offer service in English and in French.
With me up the front, Captain Riley Trigg and Captain Jeffrey Nesbitt. It is a great honour and privilege to be in command today of this first Air Canada A321XLR flight to Toronto. The good news is we've got a lovely day for flying. We have a long taxi out, and we'll get airborne towards the west, climbing up to 26,000 feet for our trip through to Toronto this afternoon. Flight time 50 minutes, and weather on the ground in Toronto 25 degrees Celsius, and mostly cloudy skies, possibility of a few thunderstorms rolling through, but we'll keep things as smooth as possible for you all. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for helping us make history today. Thank you.
With that, here's us taking off from YUL's runway 24 left on the Air Canada A321XLR's first revenue flight. Montreal to Toronto is not a very long route to cover all the new stuff on a flight like this, so let's jump right into things. First of all is the 13-inch 4K in-flight entertainment screen, which is very responsive and can still tilt slightly. Underneath the screen are 2 headphone jacks and 2 USB-C ports, as well as physical buttons for the volume, reading light, call button, and a power button. Below that is a little device holder shelf that folds out and is very sturdy. There's also this bifold tray table that's also surprisingly sturdy and can slide. I like the little silver details on the half-folded part too. There's also this large seat back pocket, as well as a smaller pocket for all the literature contents. In there was Air Canada's bistro menu, which had a couple things for purchase on flights much longer than this one, as well as instructions for connecting to their free Wi-Fi for Aeroplan members, another thing that, for the record, they introduced after Porter did it first. Air Canada also recently switched to serving Pepsi products on board, which is a choice. Again, they must have gotten a really good deal. There's also a couple air sickness bags. And finally, a crisp new safety card for the A321XLR, interestingly with the plane's full legal name on it, instead of the XLR marketing name. The NY is the official designation for the XLR variant, whereas the M is just an Air Canada designator saying it's ETOPS capable. It does make me wonder, at what point does Airbus just stop adding letters at the end? Around then, we were already flying over Ottawa and had a great clear view of the whole city below. Back inside, AC's new in-flight entertainment has a very impressive selection, with more movies and shows than you could probably ever need. I will say, the display is gorgeous, and it's a far cry from the old Project XM cabins that I grew up with. Live TV is another new addition to the entertainment, but something wasn't quite working right with it today. Another nice feature they have here is the ability to connect to Bluetooth earbuds. The free Wi-Fi also worked, although it did struggle a bit, and WestJet Starlink is still the fastest Wi-Fi across all Canadian airlines. It was funny to get a flight radar alert for the very flight I was on though. Even on a flight this short, Air Canada still attempted a full snack and drink service, and I went for a cup of Is Pepsi Okay? And their pretzels, which I really like. Predictably though, the crew were only able to get 3/4 of the way down the cabin with the drinks before they had to discontinue the service. Speaking of the rest of the cabin, Air Canada has 182 seats total on the XLRs, with the 14 in Signature and 168 in Economy. The regular economy seats are configured at a slightly tighter 31 inches of pitch, but that's actually right in line with their wide-body fleet. Just a heads up though, there is one missing window where the rear mid-cabin door would be at row 30. As for lavatories, there are 4 on these planes, with 1 at the very front and 3 at the very back. Unfortunately for their cabin crew, they kept the same space-efficient design by having 2 lavs in the back galley and 1 just in front of it. The XLR flights will also have 4 cabin crew for North American flights and 5 for transatlantic, so I wonder how that's going to work without much space for them to rest. In the actual lav, which my friend Brandon has filmed because there was no way I was going to be able to make it back there on that short a flight, there are a couple neat touchless features, like this automatically opening garbage can and the automatic toilet lid. Now, back up front, I stuck around during deplaning to try out one of those new Signature seats, and boy are these nice. They're much roomier than I thought they'd be, and even with the awkward angle, you still get a good view out the window. The tray table folds out from the side, and the monitor flips out in line with the rest of the seat. I've heard that having the monitor out can be an issue during the service, at least with other carriers that have the same seat, but apparently that's not an issue for Air Canada. Obviously, this little look is not as thorough as a real flight in one of these seats, but I can confidently say this will be worth trying out someday. And with all of that, we were already descending. As always, I'll give my final thoughts on the whole thing once we're on the ground, so here's the arrival into Toronto Pearson, landing on runway 24 left.
Toronto, the local time is 2:25. Please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened and your baggage stowed.
So that was Air Canada's first A321XLR flight, and overall, it was a pretty fun trip. It's been a while since I've done any Air Canada inaugural flights since the A220 back in 2020, and even then, that was more like the second revenue flight. I still think it's funny that someone picked the smallest possible gate area to do the event at in YUL, but I'm glad they marked the occasion, and they did it really well. One thing I like is that the normal economy seats are the same pitch as the rest of their long-haul fleet. The economy seats actually have some paddings in them as well, which was another pleasant surprise. That's a definite improvement from the Maxes that they have flying across the ocean now, including Rouge ones for some reason, but that's a rabbit hole for an entirely different video. It's not completely perfect by any means. There's still going to be an annoying lineup for anybody in the last 5 rows after every single service, but for a narrowbody flying across the Atlantic, I think Air Canada's A321XLR is going to be one of the better options out there. Thanks so much for watching this special trip report on Air Canada's latest edition, and I will see you next time.